All right, reminder here that, and you could put this on your speech planner as well, but March the 13th is when these would be starting. Next week, we will schedule your dates, as I was talking to you about. Remember, March the 13th is a Tuesday, so it's not a Monday, but it'll be a Tuesday. So we'll schedule who's debating what, when. We already know affirmative, negative, and all that kind of stuff. But this way, you'll be able to plan. It's good to know when you're going to be speaking and all that kind of stuff. Between now and I would say like Monday or Tuesday of next week, again, double check, make sure with field trips, doctor's appointments, that kind of stuff, that you know when you are available, when you're not available. Those of you going to Disney, you're not going to be affected with this at all when it comes to band trip tours, all that kind of stuff. Will certainly be done before that happens, so you don't have to worry about that whatsoever. So, introduction here gets you have 1 minute. In the grand scheme of things, it's really not all that long. Basically, what you're trying to do in your introduction, obviously, is going to be state your point, state your argument. You're also introducing the subtopic, so it's kind of giving us like a little bit of a sneak preview. Essentially, you're going up there for 1 minute just to tell us what it is that you're going to go into more detail about. Usually, the first question the folks ask is, do I have to speak for exactly 1 minute? No. 1 minute is the max that you're offered, although you do get like a 5-second grace period. So what happens is if you start to hit a minute, I hold up the red stop sign. That doesn't mean you like stop in mid-word, mid-sentence right there, but basically you finish off that thought and then you're about done. My guess is most of you are probably going to be falling into that 45 to 55 second range, and that's going to be perfectly fine. So you're just basically establishing what it is that your argument is going to do. So obviously you want to kind of state your claim. So we wanted to have a clear position taken. And I would try to reinforce, you want to make sure that you introduce the subtopics. Essentially, what are the reasons for your argument that you're going to be able to take a look at? So if wisdom is more important than intelligence, you're going to tell us at least the 2 or 3 reasons why wisdom is going to be more important. On your speech planner, at the front, you see it says main idea number 1, main idea number 2 for like the body part of your speech. If you flip the sheet over, this then also says main idea number 3, but it says optional. It's up to you as to how many of those main points you want to do. Probably it's going to be 2 or going to be 3. If you think you can cover all of your subtopics, and it's only going to take you a minute to do each subtopic, then by all means you can go ahead with 3. If you're going to be going into a little bit more depth, a little bit more detail, and you're going to need roughly about a minute and a half to cover each of your main ideas, your main arguments, then only go with 2. You're not automatically costing yourself points or anything like that if you go with 2 subtopics, 2 arguments, as opposed to 3. If you have visions of yourself doing 4 or 5, that's just not going to happen. If it does happen, that means you're not really saying a whole lot about them, and we're missing a lot of depth, detail, arguments that we want to have. And one subtopic clearly is not going to be enough. Kind of like essays, you should have some kind of like hook or attention-grabbing device. A lot of people have been told a lot of different things about what you should or should not do for hooks. Like kind of start off whether you're talking about a speech or you're talking about an essay. What are some options that have been thrown out there in our lifetimes? You could ask a question. Mr. Franks does not want Dante to ask a question in his Frankenstein essay. If you have Mr. Franks next year, don't ask a question. Okay. Like you're thinking source, like, I don't want to make it sound like relevant, but directly that you want to use for support for your argument, or are you thinking like famous quote type of thing? Okay. So some kind of quote to kind of get it started. You'll also, a lot of times, especially with speeches, folks will kind of go out with certain facts, especially some kind of statistics, like especially if it's something like surprising that would be out there. Anecdotes could be something. You could go with a personal story or an anecdote, a story that is going to be related to the topic. here would be my suggestion. And Evelyn, no offense, I would avoid questions. Because this is where you're going to be kind of stating your argument. You're going to be taking the position. You're going to be answering questions, not necessarily asking them. So now, not to say that this is going to be all-encompassing rule for everything, but generally speaking, I think it would be a good idea to avoid questions. I don't think, and there's nothing wrong with starting off with a quote. I think sometimes feel like you have to go to brainyquote.com or some other kind of famous quote website and locate a quote about artificial intelligence or something else. If there's a quote that you want to use that you think is going to be appropriate, and it could be something coming from your sources, that's fine. But don't feel the pressure to use a quotation. And the same thing would go with statistics. You certainly can, but don't feel the pressure that you're supposed to do that. The main thing with your hook is you are just simply trying to establish relevance. Somewhere between 7th and 10th grade, I think we just got convinced that you're supposed to start off with quotes, song lyrics, things like that. You can, but if you can establish the importance of the issue that you're looking at, it certainly does not have to come through a quote or come through a statistic. If you do decide to go with a statistic, keep it simple. Sometimes folks will go, did you know that 1,417,674, when you could just say, 1.4 million is much easier to register in the mind than going through all this stuff. And don't even get started with decimal points and all that. That's more than we would certainly need when it comes to verbally getting your points across. So as long as you establish the relevance, you let us know what your claim is going to be, you let us know what the subtopics are, you're going to be perfectly fine. Of those three, the one that folks are most likely to forget usually will be the subtopics. Give us a plan of attack. What is it that you're going to say? Include that information. Should be good to go. Any questions about opening? Within the body of your speech, this is where your argument actually now obviously is going to take shape. So you're going to develop, formulate the argument. We're hoping for use of logos, again, meaning that we have logic, reasoning. You can certainly use emotional appeal. If you're able to establish ethos, that's going to be fine too, but we're putting emphasis on having some logos, having some logic to it. So statistics would be an option, testimony, stories or examples, research studies. There certainly could be other things as well. I left myself some space down here where if you include other types of logos that don't fit into any of those categories, it still would count. But we're looking that you're at least going to have two types of logos, two types of reasoning to your argument, that you're explaining the validity behind it. You remember the Toolman model that we had before where you have your claim, where the data leads into the claim, but you need that warrant that's going to link that evidence to the claim. That's where this logos comes in, that we're putting emphasis on you having some logical reasoning to it. So again, you could have testimony coming from people, research studies. Personal examples could be logos, if it's certainly relevant to the issue that you're looking at. You might have some firsthand experience with some things. It does not just limit itself to those four categories, but those are the most popular ones that people tend to use. I don't have a preference for what kind you go, but we wouldn't want the whole thing to be built from testimony or research studies or statistics, but certainly having some kind of variety of things throughout the course of the body of your speech. Again, if you think about that you're looking at 2 to 3 subtopics, you spend about a minute on each one, you're going to be perfectly fine with it. The area in the body of the speech where folks sometimes run into issues because they just forget to make it clear is going to be part B here where it says you have cited sources. At least 2 sources I want you to specifically reference within your speech. That doesn't mean you're going to give a line and then go parenthesis, Smith, page 47, close parenthesis, period. But how can you reference a speech within, or how can you reference a source within the speech? According to A. Smith of the New York Times, such and such and such. According to in a recent study or in a recent poll conducted by Pew Research Center, in a Stanford study from 2016, you're letting us know what you're using as your source. So, you might have an article that you found in opposing viewpoints. It makes reference to that study that is done. That's perfectly fine. Just verbally cue in that you're looking at a couple sources. So you have to have at least 5 points for each source. If you reference your 2 sources, you get 10 points. The one thing to be aware of, and Dante talked about using a quote as your attention grabber, up at the top, which would be perfectly fine. These reference sources, though, need to be happening within the body of your speech. So if you do make reference to a source in your introduction, that's fine. You're not losing points for it or anything. But rather than then directly referencing 2 sources, you would have to reference 3 because you got your 2 from the body plus your 1 that's in your intro. Simple enough. According to, in a recent article, those would certainly be some phrases that you could use. Might not be a bad idea to write just in the margins. Your closing, you're doing a couple things here because you have both the rebuttal and then you have your conclusion that's taking place. Remember, rebuttal is going to be the counter argument. You do need to think of this as being very fluid as opposed to scripted so far as your speech. You might script out your intro. You could script out the body of the body part of your speech a little bit. But the closing has to be fluid because this is going to be dependent upon your opponent. You don't know what your counter argument is going to be really until you hear what the other person's argument would be. Mr. Kane, how do I fill out anything then on a counter argument on a speech planner if I don't know what Evelyn's going to say within her argument? Well, I can still at least kind of plan what I think her argument would be. So I think on the back of your speech planner it would be a good idea to still include what some potential arguments would be. But until Maddie, Shrey, Savannah, whoever delivers the argument, you don't really know what that counter argument is fully going to be, which would be a reason to take paper, have notes, fill out as they're going along, so that when Jack inevitably puts his foot in his mouth, then you can, pounce on it and try to take it. Nico? Brent? We do not even accomplish her name. Like psychological intimidation.
Use that exact phrase.
If I'm Brandon, I'm just going to go up and do a hair flip. And, my opponent. That was actually good timing because what's something that you could do within your counter argument? Not only counter argue points that they do make, but if you see things like logical fallacies that are popping up, then by all means you could go ahead and highlight them for them. Now, keep in mind, just because someone uses, they use a source, according to Dr. So-and-so, that doesn't mean that automatically it's appeal to authority as a logical fallacy. That's only going to work if it's in the absence of reason. Just because someone does make an emotional appeal doesn't mean it's going to be faulty emotional appeal. It has to, again, be within the absence of reason. But logical fallacies could be a potential thing that you take a look at. Certainly exceptions to their argument could be something that you look at. And obviously just, logical reasoning would be something that you could also identify. By all means, stay away from, the ad hominem kind of idea. Don't listen to what my opponent says. He's known to have gotten a 37%, on an English essay in 10th grade. That's not really going to be too relevant to what we're dealing with in here. I don't know who got the 37%. Justin's looking around, identifying people, because he's trying to get people to stop looking at him.
I was pretty good at it.
Who'd you have in 10th grade?
Perry.
Mrs. Perry. Then you had creative writing earlier this year. Yep. Came in, stole my laptop.
Yeah,
Within the 2 minutes, you're probably going to spend, I would say, on the rebuttal. Certainly, this can all kind of change a little bit, but probably in the neighborhood of a minute to a minute 30. And then that gives you your remaining time where you can restate your claim, highlight your best points. Restate what your position is going to be, and it ends off with a nice, pretty smooth closing to it. So the most that you would really be speaking at any one time is going to be in the body of the speech when you have 3 minutes. Don't feel like in the body of the speech or at the closing that you need to do like a mini introduction again. You already did that in your opening minute. Here you're jumping into your argument pretty much right away. The only other thing that you would need to keep an eye on is this part down here with the use of eloquence. You need to have at least 3 unique examples. So this would mean you're not going to go using alliteration twice per se. You could, but you'd still have to have 2 more separate examples. You have to have at least 3 unique examples. The only requirement being that it's a mix of scheme and tropes. So whether you go with 2 schemes and 1 trope or 1 scheme and 2 tropes makes no difference to me. But you have to have a mixture, and you have to have at least 3 separate examples. Those examples can fall anywhere within your introduction and the body of the conclusion. At the bottom of your speech planner, you'll see a place where it says, identify what the scheme, the trope is, and then give an example. So you're basically giving me a verbal cue that this is what I'm looking at with my antimetaboly, your imagery, personalization, that kind of stuff. Remember, just because you use the word I or me doesn't mean it's personalization. If you're going to be using personalization, you're actually putting yourself into the speech itself, the relevance of it, how it would apply to you. But whether you go, simile, metaphor, analogy, allusion, does not matter, so long as you do have a mix of those 2 things. And that can be, again, opening, can be body, can be in conclusion. Spread out, all in one of those areas, makes no difference, but you have to have at least 3 of those examples. The places where folks generally might slip up, not because it's difficult, but just because they kind of forget about it a little bit or they're not clear with it, would be use of eloquence and the cited sources. If you were not to reference any sources, you use them, but you don't reference them at all, that 10 points, you got yourself a 0. If you didn't make reference to your eloquence, 0 out of 15, you add those 2 things up. Right now you're dealing at a 75 out of 100. Which certainly could kind of limit the score a little bit. So make sure you do include those 2 points of reference. Make sure you include those examples of eloquence. Just because they appear on the speech planner is not enough. If they're written on the speech planner but you don't say them, I can't count them towards the points for that. You'll still get a homework credit. You'll still get credit for turning in the works cited page and the speech planner. So you get credit for the eloquence there, but the examples do need to be spoken in order for them to count. Should Elena say that she's going to do an illusion, and she doesn't. But I recognize that she uses another form of eloquence in its place. So long as I recognize that she can still get credit for it. The best case would be, put the ones down that you plan on using, make sure you incorporate those. That could also be another reason why you would want to bring the speech planner up with you, as opposed to maybe relying just on those cards and things like that. Any questions? The parts down at the bottom, speaking techniques, not looking for ways to take points away, more or less trying to find ways to reward for what you do well. I understand that eye contact is not going to be 100% of the time, but certainly want you looking up as opposed to down at the paper all the time or whatnot. But so far as like vocal presentation, as long as we can hear you, probably going to be in good shape. Don't be chewing gum, don't bite your nails, don't chew your hair. If you have long hair, maybe you want to go like a ponytail or bun so you don't start playing with it all the time. I have no idea what we're going to do for you. Yeah. So if you get like the old headgear that you had to wear like in the 80s when you got like braces and stuff.
I would rather have my weed than that, honestly. We have that at my house. My sister was like, she's like, Robert,
headband,
Yeah.
borrow Callie's. Get a haircut with Justin. Get a haircut with Justin. So you get a nice little fade or something ahead of time. We'll see. So grand total for this, as stated here clearly, is 100. It's really going to be roughly about 125 points for the simple fact that you're going to get 25 points for your works cited page and the speech planner that you're going to turn in. For noodle bib, there's not a noodle bib checkpoint that I'm going to be doing with the speech. My hope would be, though, that through this assignment, you're probably adding somewhere in the ballpark of like 10 sources. Not meaning that you have 10 sources that are going on a works cited page, but again, what goes in the noodle bib are sources that you look at, that you check in. So if you end up having, you have to have at least 2 on your works cited page. Typically, folks have in the ballpark of about 5. Some might only have 2, some will go a little bit higher, but usually they're around like 4 or 5. Those are the sources that you use with your speech. But my guess is you're probably going to have 4 to 6 sources that you consult, but you end up going, nope, this isn't really going to be too useful for me. Those obviously still go in the noodle bib. So if you were able to pull in 15, let's say for the Sparta base that we did the first time, you have your article analysis source that would be going in, plus this assignment. If you're around that 25 area after this one, you're in pretty good shape for what you'll need for the rest of the year. If you're at like 3, then you got a little bit more work that you have to do. Doesn't mean you're dead in the water yet, but you got a little bit more work that you have to do. Tomorrow we're gonna have laptops in here. My guess is they're probably going to be the laptops from Mrs. Burns' room. I think we were using them at the beginning of the year. Mrs. Perry and I are doing research with 10th grade in the library. Library computers aren't working too well, so we've been using our laptops down there. So it's a little bit of a scheduling conflict. Maybe by the end of next week we'll have our regular laptops back, but I'd say it's a pretty good chance, especially for tomorrow, we'll probably be using the ones from Mrs. Burns. If you remember what number you used with hers last time, great. If not, maybe stay with your normal number is, and at least when you go to use that one next time, the login process shouldn't be all that bad for it. There's not any more paperwork that's coming your way. There's not any more assignment thing that's going to be coming your way, but it's pretty much going to be you now kind of starting with some arguments, brainstorm, think what you want your plan to be. Keep in mind, you partnered up with someone yesterday to select topic and to select side. You are under no responsibility to partner up with that person again, because now you are setting up your argument the way that you want to be. If you need to go over anything with your opponent so far as you want to make sure you're dealing with the same definition of like artificial intelligence or one of those concepts, that's fine, but don't feel like you have to sit by that person. I would suggest thinking of your own subtopics first before you start jumping into the databases and the research and all that kind of stuff. Just so you're kind of determining what your own argument is. In the library, the new web filter is a pain in the butt right now. So one thing that could potentially happen, generally when you access the databases, that's been a way that you can kind of bypass anything. So if you had an article, for example, and you try to look up something that said like guns or whatnot, and it could get blocked. Normally, if you're going through the databases, that wasn't an issue. It's been a problem the last couple of days. So there could be a situation where you're trying to access something. If you can't access it here, access it at home, or if you want to take out a cell phone and use data, you could access it, email the article to yourself in student Gmail, then you would be able to access it. But when it comes to whether it be databases or just websites, typically out there, you might be running into some more issues with the web filter, just based on what's been happening in the library the last couple of days and what we're used to. So just be aware of that. If you find stuff at home, email it, maybe copy and paste it into a Google document, just so you're not having issues with whatever. I had someone try to look up an article that had the word teens and alcohol, and they were getting flagged. And we put it in Google. So. Sugar is bad. I don't know. Do you know what it was blocking?
It's just every website that isn't like the school website.
It was getting like that little, like it was a little blue screen thing. Yeah. So, yeah, again, like if you wanted to use a phone to kind of send yourself some documents or whatnot, you certainly could. Might be brainstorming more in here, get articles at home, send them your way, and then you'll be able to work with them.
Is there a paper that goes with the check?
There's like from in Aspire, you're supposed to like print out the last sheet, and that's where there's student signature, parent signature.
Because I was checked, I just didn't.
Okay, do you want me to hold on to this? Should I just go with the- So, like, feeling kind of.
I'm good.
Whereas thinking is solely, not solely, but more that organizational. So you only put what you're doing. So, I think for you, it's probably easier because you're going to be feeling, you're going to be looking at that human interaction, human emotions.
I'll take one. Take this share.
I like that. Yeah.
Like that part of the body. I would probably, you definitely could. I'm wondering if that might work better down here.
Shall we talk so much trash?
Yeah, I just learned from Black Sand.
On you.
Yeah. But like try to like make like sly comments about how to
Um, I would try to come up with
you like you could be the top kid in all my classes and so try.
do you want to go to field more towards that thinking, or do you think around that he's as some shows thinking is more important than feeling?
Yeah.
Richard E. Green was a part of it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he agreed with some part of it.
So,
Skip work. Black Panther will make you money. It will make you wealthy and happiness and all.
Like, oh, that's good.
Wait, what?
I'm like, hey,
You don't have to have hard one. Yes.
and then I'll like raise them for great.
Right. It's trying to come up with some resolutions and still feel like it's not just artificial intelligence without making it solely argue about that. And the same thing would go, like, okay, it doesn't mean like all his pro arguments have to be, well, this is why artificial intelligence is better. He could still be looking at thinking from a human element, but the expectation would be there that you're going to connect artificial intelligence back.
I was just like, what the, it's 3 years out.
Yeah.
I like watching things go.
When's your study hall?
It was.
Yeah,
If you want, remember to.
It was.
mine, 7th grade when you're writing, so. That's study hall, you said?
I didn't, I wouldn't.